I never imagined my son-in-law could do something so cruel. On a freezing winter night, I opened the door and froze when I saw my daughter holding my little granddaughter, both trembling under blankets. She cried, "Dad," he wouldn't let me turn on the heater. He locked it. I stared at the disabled heater in the freezing room, then asked him, "How much is my family's life worth to you?" His answer made me decide to make him pay for everything he had done. Before we begin, thank you for being here. It means more than you know. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Your city, your state, your country. I read every single one. A quick note, this story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. Names and places are coincidental. But the lesson inside it, that part is yours to keep. The text message came in 4:47 in the afternoon, and I almost missed it. I was elbowed deep in a service report for a commercial job we just finished downtown, a 12-unit HVAC overhaul for a medical office building on 5th Avenue, when my phone buzzed on the corner of my desk. I almost let it go to the pile. 30 years of running Sutton Mechanical had taught me that the work never stopped, not even on Friday afternoons in January. But something made me look. It was from Megan. "Dad, please come. I don't want to make a big deal, but something's wrong. Tyler's out until 6. Please." That was it. No explanation, no follow-up. Just those 2 sentences sitting on my screen like a crack in a wall you weren't sure had always been there. I grabbed my coat before I finished reading it a second time. The drive from our offices on the north side to Fox Chapel takes about 25 minutes on a good day. That Friday, with ice on the bridges and commuter traffic backing up along Route 28, it took me 40. I drove every one of those minutes with my hands too tight on the wheel and the heater blasting and a feeling in my chest I couldn't name. Not quite fear, not quite anger, something that lived in the space between the two. Fox Chapel is the kind of neighborhood where every house looks like a Christmas card even in January. Big colonials set back from the road, 3-car garages, mailboxes with the family name painted on them in gold. The Harlow house, the house I bought for my daughter 3 years ago, the one I put $1.2 million into so she would have something solid under her feet, sat on Lakeview Drive behind a row of blue spruce trees I had planted the spring after closing. Every other house on that street had warm light glowing from the windows. The Harlow house was dark. I pulled under the driveway and sat in the car for exactly 4 seconds before I got out. The cold hit me like a wall -8 Fahrenheit, with a wind chill that made it feel closer to 20 below. The Pittsburgh forecast had called it a polar vortex event. 3 days of temperatures that could kill a person who stayed outside too long. I rang the doorbell. Nothing. I knocked hard enough that my knuckles ached. Nothing. I pulled out the spare key I'd kept on my ring since the day I handed them the house. The key Tyler had asked me twice to return, and I'd twice pretended to forget about, and I let myself in. The cold that hit me when I opened that door was not the sharp, clean cold of outside. It was something worse. It was the dead, stale cold of a space that had been sealed up and left to drop degree by degree over hours. The kind of cold that settles into furniture and floors and doesn't announce itself until it's already everywhere. I could see my own breath inside my daughter's house. "Megan." My voice came out sharper than I intended. She was in the living room, curled into the corner of the leather sofa, with a flannel blanket pulled up to her chin and another one layered over her lap. She was wearing a thick sweatshirt, wool socks pulled up to her knees, and she had Lily bundled against her chest. My 5-month-old granddaughter wrapped in what looked like every blanket in the house, stacked on top of one another. Megan looked up at me, and her eyes were red and raw, the skin around them tight, the way skin gets when someone has been trying very hard not to cry for a very long time. "Dad." Her voice cracked straight down the middle. I crossed the room in 4 steps and pressed my hand to Lily's cheek. Her skin was cold, not cool. Cold, the kind of cold that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. "How long has she been like this?" I demanded, pulling off my coat and wrapping it around both of them without waiting for an answer. "Since this morning." Megan's teeth were chattering now that I was close enough to hear it. She wouldn't stop shivering after her 9ing feeding, and I kept thinking she'd warm up, that I could keep her warm enough if I just held her. But she's been fussing, and she won't eat. And she didn't want to overreact. That's what I thought standing there in that freezing living room, holding my granddaughter's cold face in my warm hands. I didn't say it out loud. Not yet. I went straight to the thermostat on the wall between the living room and the hallway. The digital display read 45 Fahrenheit. I reached for the control panel and pressed the up arrow. Nothing happened. I pressed it again. The screen flickered, and then a small padlock icon appeared in the upper right corner. Someone had locked the thermostat with a passcode. Not a malfunction, not a dead battery, a deliberate manual lock. The air in my lungs turned to concrete. Megan. I kept my voice level by force of will alone. Who locked this? She pulled Lily tighter to her chest and looked at the wall instead of at me. That was answer enough. I turned back to the thermostat and started trying override codes, standard factory resets, installer sequences I'd memorized 20 years ago from running service calls on this exact brand of unit. On the third combination, the padlock icon disappeared. I pushed the temperature up to 72 degrees. The house was so cold it would take 20 minutes just to feel the difference. I turned around. Somewhere down the hallway behind a closed door, I could hear the faint sound of a television. And underneath it, low and steady and unmistakable to anyone who'd spent 3 decades in the heating business, the soft mechanical hum of a space heater running at full capacity. My jaw tightened so hard my back teeth ached. Then I heard it, the slow groan of the garage door rolling open. Tyler was home. The garage door hadn't finished closing before Tyler Harlow walked into his own house like a man who owned every inch of it, which, as I would soon remind him, he absolutely did not. He was wearing a charcoal wool overcoat that probably cost more than what I paid my junior technicians for a month's work, carrying a dry cleaning bag over one shoulder and a Starbucks cup in his free hand. He stopped when he saw me standing by the thermostat, and for just a fraction of a second, something moved across his face. Not guilt, not concern, just the mild irritation of a man whose Friday evening routine had been interrupted. Gerald. He set the dry cleaning on the stair railing and took a long sip of his coffee. Didn't know you were stopping by, Tyler. I kept my voice the same temperature as the room had been when I walked in. Why is the thermostat locked at 45 degrees? He tilted his head like I'd asked him something faintly ridiculous. Heating bills have been brutal this winter. I'm being responsible with the budget. Your daughter, I said, and I pointed toward the living room where Megan was still on the sofa with Lily pressed against her chest, is 5 months old. It is 8 degrees outside. Responsible is not the word I would use. Tyler glanced toward the living room. 1 glance, maybe 2 seconds, and then he looked back at me. Megan runs hot. She's always complaining about being too warm. And babies regulate temperature fine, Gerald. They're tougher than people give them credit for. My fingers curled into a fist at my side so hard I felt my knuckles pop. Lily's hands are cold, Tyler. Her face is cold. She hasn't been eating. I took 1 step toward him. You locked the thermostat so Megan couldn't override it. That is not a budget decision. That is a choice. It's my house, he said, and he had the actual nerve to smile a little when he said it. I make the choices here. From down the hallway, a door opened. The warmth hit me first. A wave of it rolling out from the back of the house, like an exhale from a different world. Donna Harlow filled the doorway in a silk robe and slippers, holding a mug of tea in both hands. Her hair freshly blown out like she'd spent the afternoon in a salon chair. Oh, Gerald. She didn't even have the decency to look surprised. I didn't hear you come in. I looked past her into the room. A Vornado space heater was running on the floor beside the bed, red coils glowing. The room was at least 75 degrees. There were cashmere throw blankets on the armchair, a tray on the nightstand with crackers and cheese, and a glass of sparkling water. I turned back to Tyler. My voice dropped to something very quiet and very final. Your mother's room is 75 degrees. Your wife and your infant daughter are sitting in 45 degrees. And you're telling me this is a budget decision? Tyler squared his shoulders. My mother has blood pressure issues. She needs consistent warmth. Dr. Hartley has told her repeatedly that cold temperatures are hard on her cardiovascular system. She's a priority. Lily is 5 months old. The words came out like gravel. She is your daughter. She is your priority. Megan is 28 years old and perfectly healthy, Tyler said, his voice taking on that particular edge men use when they've decided they're done being questioned. She can put on an extra sweater. This conversation is over. I raised my hand, and I'm not proud of what I wanted to do with it in that moment. Dad. Megan's voice came from behind me, thin and urgent. Dad, please. I turned. She had stood up from the sofa, still holding Lily, and she was looking at me with eyes that were begging me to stop, her lower lip trembling. Her whole body braced like she was waiting for a collision. Please don't do this. We're okay. I'm okay. Just please don't make it worse. She was shaking, not just from the cold. I had seen that look before. I just hadn't let myself name it until that moment, standing in my daughter's freezing house while her husband stood 10 feet away in a wool overcoat, sipping a latte. That look was the look of a woman who had been taught slowly, carefully, over years, that her own discomfort was an inconvenience to everyone around her, that her pain was an overreaction, that keeping the peace was worth more than her own well-being or her daughter's. I lowered my hand. I turned back to Tyler. He was watching me with an expression that was almost smug, the look of a man who had just watched someone else flinch first. Fine, I said. I walked back to the thermostat. I pulled up the override menu again, and I set the temperature to 72 degrees. Then I pulled my phone from my pocket and took a photograph of the thermostat screen, the timestamp, the locked icon still visible in the history log, the 45 degrees setting Tyler had programmed. He frowned. What are you doing? Documenting a safety concern. I pocketed my phone and picked up my coat from the sofa. The override I had used was a temporary installer sequence. It would hold until someone with the user passcode reset it manually. Tyler knew his own code. I knew that too. I leaned down and pressed my lips to the top of Lily's head, and I held Megan's gaze for a long moment. Her eyes were flooding, 2 tears breaking loose and running straight down her face before she pressed her cheek against Lily's and turned away. I walked to the front door. Gerald. Tyler's voice followed me. You don't need to make this into something it isn't. I opened the door. The polar vortex hit me full in the face, bitter and sharp and honest in a way that the air inside that house had stopped being a long time ago. I didn't answer him. I pulled the door shut behind me, walked to my truck, and sat in the driver's seat in the dark with the engine off for a long time. The photograph on my phone glowed on the seat beside me. I had driven 40 minutes through ice and traffic because my daughter sent me a 2-sentence text message she almost certainly wasn't supposed to send. And what I had walked into was worse than anything I'd let myself imagine on the way over. What I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't know for another 9 hours, was that it was going to get so much worse before I had the chance to make it right. I had driven back to the office after leaving Fox Chapel because I couldn't make myself go home. Home was quiet and empty and full of the kind of stillness that gives a man too much room to think. The office at least had paperwork, invoices, the low hum of the server room down the hall. Things that required just enough of my brain to keep the rest of it from going somewhere I wasn't ready to go yet. I sat at my desk and stared at the photograph on my phone. The thermostat screen 45 degrees, the padlock icon in the history log, the timestamp. On the wall across from my desk, there was a framed photo I'd hung there sometime around 2003 and never taken down. Megan was 4 years old in it, sitting in the cab of my first Sutton mechanical service truck, a beat-up white Ford F-250 with a dent in the passenger door and rust along the wheel wells. She was wearing my hard hat, which sat so far down on her tiny head, it covered her eyebrows entirely. She was grinning like she had invented smiling. I had driven that truck to 12-hour calls in January. I had climbed icy rooftops in winds that made your eyes water and your stop working, right? I had done it so that one day my daughter would have a life where nobody asked her to be cold. My phone rang at 2:17 in the morning. The number on the screen read Allegheny General Hospital, and the floor dropped out of my stomach before I even answered. Mr. Sutton, a woman's voice, professional and carefully level. This is the charge nurse in the emergency department at Allegheny General. We have your daughter, Megan Harlow, here. She came in by ambulance about 20 minutes ago. She's stable, but I need you to come in. What about the baby? My voice came out rough. Lily, 5 months old. Was she with her? A pause that lasted half a second, too long. Yes, sir. Lily was brought in with her. She's been transferred to our neonatal intensive care unit. I'd really like you to come in so Dr. Reeves can speak with you directly. I don't remember the drive. I remember the parking garage, the automatic doors, the smell of the ear antiseptic and floor wax, and the particular staleness of recycled hospital air. I remember the admitting desk and giving my name and being told to wait, and I remember that I did not wait. I walked straight through the double doors into the ER bay and said my daughter's name loudly enough that 3 nurses looked up at once. A doctor in green scrubs came toward me with his hand out. Mr. Sutton, I'm Dr. Reeves. Let's go somewhere we can talk. He walked me to a small consultation room off the main corridor and shut the door. And then he told me what had happened. Megan had called 911 at 1:52 in the morning. By the time paramedics arrived, Lily's core body temperature had dropped to 95.2 Fahrenheit. In an infant, Dr. Reeves explained, hypothermia is classified as a core temp below 97 degrees. At 95, the risks included cardiac arrhythmia, respiratory failure, and neurological damage. And we have her in the incubator now, he said. And she's responding well to the warming protocol. Her heart rate is stabilizing. But Mr. Sutton, if your daughter had waited another 30 to 45 minutes before calling, we would be having a very different conversation right now. My throat closed so completely, I couldn't have spoken if I'd tried. I nodded because it was all I could do. Megan is being treated for mild frostbite on the fingers of her right hand. Dr. Reeves continued, and moderate dehydration. She told our intake nurse she'd been using her own body heat to keep the baby warm for most of the evening. He paused and looked at me carefully. Mr. Sutton, can you tell me what the heating situation was like in that home tonight? It was locked at 45 degrees, I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. I was there around 5. I overrode it and set it to 72. Whoever locked it must have reset it after I left. Dr. Reeves wrote something on his clipboard. I'm going to need to flag this for our social work team. A thermostat locked below safe temperatures with an infant in the home is something we're required to document. Document everything, I said. I'll be asking for copies. He gave me a look that was equal parts professional and human, and then he asked if I wanted to see Lily. The NICU was on the 3rd floor behind 2 sets of security doors that required a badge swipe and a staff escort. Dr. Reeves handed me off to a NICU nurse named Patricia, who gave me a gown to pull over my clothes and walked me through the hand-washing protocol with the patience of someone who understood that the people who came through these doors were not always capable of following instructions without gentle guidance. I followed her through a 3rd door, and then I saw Lily. She was in an incubator in the 2nd row, a clear plastic box about the size of a large suitcase filled with warm circulated air and soft light. She had electrode leads on her chest no bigger than silver dollars and a pulse oximeter wrapped around her tiny foot and a warming blanket tucked around her legs. The monitor above her showed her heart rate, her oxygen saturation, her temperature climbing back toward normal in small increments. She was asleep. Her hands were curled loosely at her sides. Her cheeks were starting to pink up at the edges. I pressed both palms flat against the outside of the incubator because Patricia had explained I couldn't open the port without her present. And I stood there and looked at my granddaughter through the plastic. The machine was doing what the heater in my house was supposed to do. I had installed systems like this, warming units, incubators, climate-controlled medical environments. I had serviced them, certified my technicians on them, built entire contracts around keeping them running. I had done that work so that hospitals could keep vulnerable people warm. And my granddaughter was in one tonight because the man living in the house I bought had decided that the electric bill mattered more than she did. She's strong, Patricia said quietly beside me. Her numbers are moving in the right direction. Dr. Reeves thinks she'll be out of the incubator by morning if she keeps this up. She's the strongest person I know, I said, and I meant it in a way I couldn't entirely explain. Patricia gave me a moment, and then she said, Mr. Sutton, your daughter is asking for you. I pressed my hand one more time against the warm plastic. Then I turned and walked toward the family waiting room. Tyler Harlow was already there. Tyler Harlow was not pacing. He was not asking nurses for updates. He was not staring at the door to the treatment area with the hollow, desperate look of a man waiting to hear if his family was going to be okay. He was sitting in a cushioned chair in the corner of the family waiting room, with his legs crossed at the ankle, his overcoat folded neatly over the armrest beside him, and his phone held in both hands at chest height, his thumbs moving across the screen with quick practiced efficiency. The overhead lights were dim at this hour, but the glow from his screen lit up his face clearly enough, focused, calm, completely absorbed in whatever he was doing. I stood in the doorway for a long moment and watched him. My granddaughter was in an incubator on the 3rd floor with electrode leads on her chest. My daughter had frostbite on her right hand from spending the night using her own body to keep that baby warm. And Tyler Harlow was sitting here with his legs crossed, like he was waiting for a delayed flight. I walked across the waiting room and dropped into the chair directly across from him. The legs scraped the linoleum loud enough that he finally looked up. Gerald. He set the phone face down on his knee. How's Lily? Stable. I kept my voice flat. Core temp was 95.2 when they brought her in. You know what happens to a 5-month-old at 95 degrees, Tyler? Her heart starts to malfunction. Her lungs start to fail. Her brain starts to lose oxygen. I leaned forward with my elbows on my knees. The doctor told me if Megan had waited another 45 minutes, we would not be having this conversation. Something flickered across Tyler's face. Not guilt, not horror, just the careful recalibration of a man deciding how much concern was appropriate to display. I'm glad she's okay, he said. Megan tends to panic. I've told her before she catastrophizes things. I stood up so fast the chair skidded back 2 feet. I picked it up, grabbed it by the back with both hands, and swung it hard into the wall beside me. The impact sent a crack, echoing through the entire waiting room. A plastic magazine rack fell off the wall. Somewhere behind me, a woman gasped. Tyler dropped his phone. It hit the seat beside him and bounced onto the cushion. Before he could react, a security guard pushed through the door at a jog. Sir, I need you to calm down right now, or I'm going to have to ask you to leave the building. I apologize. I straightened up and smoothed the front of my jacket with both hands. My voice was completely steady. I lost my footing. It won't happen again. The guard looked at me, looked at Tyler, looked at the chair. He picked the chair up himself, set it back in place, told us both to keep it down, and walked back to his station. Tyler cleared his throat. I'm going to get some water. He stood, tucked his phone into his coat pocket, and walked out of the waiting room with the careful, unhurried stride of a man who had just decided the conversation was over. He left the phone on the chair. I saw it the moment he was through the door. It had slipped out of his pocket when he stood, and it was sitting right there on the blue cushion, screen still lit. A notification banner was expanded across the top. Marcus Cole, call me now. I picked it up. The screen was still unlocked. Tyler used Face ID, but he hadn't re-engaged it after I'd startled him, and the phone was open to his messages. I found Marcus Cole's thread near the top of the list. What I read made the blood in my veins go cold, in a way that had nothing to do with the January temperatures outside. Tyler owed $60,000 to Marcus Cole, the result of a crypto investment scheme that had collapsed 6 months ago. The messages from Cole's side of the thread were short and specific deadlines, consequences, a reference to sending people by if payment didn't arrive. Tyler's responses were a masterwork of stalling, deflecting, and promising things he had no ability to deliver until 3 days ago. 3 days ago, Tyler had sent Marcus Cole a message that I read 4 times to make sure I was understanding it correctly. I have a house in Fox Chapel worth 1.2. Easy. Wife just had a baby. Once she's up and moving, I'm sending her to stay with her mother so I can list it or flip it fast. Should clear your 60+ interest. No problem. Just give me a few more weeks. Sending her to stay with her mother, my daughter, my granddaughter, out of the house I had bought in January with nowhere confirmed to go so that Tyler Harlow could liquidate a property he had never owned to cover a debt he had hidden from everyone who trusted him. I scrolled up to find Donna's thread. Her last message had been sent at 11:30 the previous night, while Lily was already in the ambulance. "Tyler, is everything okay over there?" I heard sirens. "Are we still confirmed for Scottsdale?" I already called the resort to confirm the spa package. "Don't let this ruin the trip." Tyler's reply sent at midnight. "Everything's fine, Mom. Gerald showed up and made a scene, but it's handled. Trip is still on. Get some sleep." I set the phone back on the cushion exactly as I'd found it, face up in the center of the seat. Then I sat down in my own chair, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. Tyler came back 2 minutes later with a bottle of water. He picked up his phone without looking at me, checked the screen, slipped it into his pocket. He sat down on the far side of the waiting room and unscrewed the cap on his water bottle. He had no idea. He thought he was sitting across from a tired old man who had just lost his temper and apologized for it. He thought the worst thing that had happened tonight was that his father-in-law had made a scene in a hospital waiting room. I looked at him across the low table between us, this man who had locked my granddaughter in a 45-degree house and then sat booking spa packages while she was in an incubator upstairs. And I felt the last of my anger drain away completely. What replaced it was something much colder, much quieter, much more permanent. I had spent 30 years in this business learning one thing above all else. When a system is broken beyond repair, you don't patch it. You pull it out entirely. You start from scratch. You build something that actually works. Tyler Harlow had just become a system I was going to pull out entirely. I just needed to make a phone call first. I told Tyler to go home before I left the waiting room. Not because I was done with him. Not because I had forgiven anything or forgotten anything, or decided to let the night settle into something manageable. I told him to go home because I needed him out of that building, out of my sight, and back in Fox Chapel where he thought he was safe, so that when everything came apart around him, he would have no idea it had already started. He left without argument. He was actually relieved. I could see it in the way his shoulders dropped when I said it, the small exhale he tried to hide by reaching for his coat. His wife was in the hospital. His daughter was in the NICU, and the news that he could go home was the best thing that had happened to him all night. That told me everything I would ever need to know about Tyler Harlow. I drove back to the Sutton Mechanical offices on the north side, not home. The office home could wait. Home was for people who were finished, and I was just getting started. The building was dark when I pulled into the lot, just the security lights along the roof line and the glow of the exit signs through the front windows. I used my key, disabled the alarm, and walked down the hallway to my office without turning on the overhead lights. Just the desk lamp, just enough to see. I sat down and I looked at the wall. That photograph of Megan at 4 years old was still there. The hard hat, the Ford F-250, the grin that took up half her face. I had looked at that picture so many times over the years that I had stopped really seeing it. Tonight I saw it. I had built Sutton Mechanical from a single service van and a borrowed set of tools. I had spent January mornings on rooftops so cold the metal stuck to your gloves. I had worked weekends, missed school plays, eaten dinner at 10 at night because the job ran long and the customer needed heat. And that was simply what you did. I had done all of it so that Megan would never have to fight for anything the way I had fought for everything. And what I had actually done, I understood it fully for the first time, sitting in that dark office at 3:15 in the morning, was build her a cage with a very comfortable lining. I had made her life so smooth that she had never developed the instincts to recognize when someone was taking advantage of her. I had handed Tyler Harlow the key to that cage and called it a wedding gift. I picked up my phone and called David Keller. He answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep but sharpening fast. David had been my attorney for 25 years. He had written every contract Sutton Mechanical had ever signed, negotiated every acquisition, structured every partnership agreement. He was 71 years old and still the sharpest person in any room he walked into. Gerald. A pause, papers rustling. It's 3 in the morning. I know what time it is, David. I kept my voice level. I need you at the office. We're executing the property protocol on the Fox Chapel house. A silence that lasted exactly 4 seconds. David knew what the property protocol meant. We had written it into the conditional use agreement 3 years ago as a contingency, a legal mechanism that allowed Sutton Mechanical LLC to reclaim the Fox Chapel property immediately in the event of a documented safety violation on the premises. At the time, David had called it excessive. I had called it prudent. Tonight, it was neither. It was necessary. Gerald, his voice was careful. You're sure? Once we move on this, the man has nothing. No house, no accounts, no— He locked the thermostat at 45 degrees, David. My voice came out harder than I intended. My granddaughter is in the NICU right now with hypothermia. The hospital is flagging it for their social work team. He used my credit line to book a luxury resort while Lily was being loaded into an ambulance. I stopped, drew a breath, and he has been planning to sell that house behind Megan's back to cover $60,000 in debt to a loan shark. He was going to put my daughter and my granddaughter out on the street to save his own skin. Another silence, longer this time. Give me 30 minutes, David said. He was there in 22. He came through the door in a heavy wool overcoat, with his briefcase in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other. He sat both on the conference table, opened the briefcase, and started pulling files without waiting to be asked. He had the conditional use agreement, the LLC property deed, the corporate account documentation, and a blank eviction order template that he had clearly retrieved from his home office before driving over. He poured 2 cups of coffee, slid one across the table to me, and sat down. Walk me through it, he said. I told him everything. The thermostat, the photograph I had taken, the NICU, the messages on Tyler's phone, Marcus Cole, the $60,000, the plan to sell the house and put Megan on the street. Donna's message asking about Scottsdale while the ambulance was pulling away. David listened without interrupting. He took notes in his small, precise handwriting. When I finished, he set his pen down and looked at me across the table. The safety violation clause in the conditional use agreement covers this, he said. A thermostat deliberately locked below safe temperatures for an infant constitutes a documented hazard. Combined with the hospital's social work report, we have grounds for immediate corporate recovery of the property. Tyler signed as authorized occupant, not owner. He has no tenant protections under Pennsylvania law because he never paid rent. Sutton Mechanical can recover that property today. Then let's recover it, I said. David picked up his pen and began drafting the eviction order. His handwriting was steady and unhurried the way it always was when he was doing something he was completely certain about. I'll need your crew there at 7, he said without looking up. Full inventory removal, everything the company purchased. Mike Kowalski will have 8 men there at 7 sharp, I said, and Gerald. David looked up then, just briefly. What do you want left behind? I didn't hesitate even slightly. Tyler's clothes, Donna's bags, and black trash bags on the lawn. David wrote it down. Outside, the temperature had dropped to -12. Through the window behind my desk, I could see the parking lot lights throwing pale orange circles on the empty asphalt, and beyond them, the dark outline of the city. Somewhere across that city, Tyler Harlow was asleep in a warm house that was going to be empty by noon. By 4 in the morning, David had the eviction order drafted, signed, and notarized. He kept a notary stamp in his briefcase the same way some men kept a pocket knife. Because in 25 years of working with me, he had learned that the moments that mattered rarely came with advance notice. He slid the document across the table, and I read it twice before I picked up the pen. Once you sign this, David said, Sutton Mechanical is on record as initiating corporate recovery of the Fox Chapel property due to documented safety violations under Section 9 of the Conditional Use Agreement. The clock starts the moment your signature hits that paper. Then let's start the clock. I signed my name at the bottom in the same handwriting I'd used to sign my first commercial contract 30 years ago. Deliberate, unhurried, nothing to prove. David took the document back and slid it into a folder. Then he turned his laptop to face me and pulled up the Sutton Mechanical corporate banking portal. The secondary credit card accounts were listed in a clean column on the left side of the screen. Tyler Harlow, Donna Harlow, both active, both with a credit line I had extended for what I had been told were household expenses related to Megan's pregnancy and Lily's first months. I scrolled through the transaction history one more time because I wanted to be absolutely certain I was feeling exactly what I thought I was feeling before I did what I was about to do. Morton's Steakhouse, $340. Nordstrom, $615. A men's clothing boutique on Walnut Street, $890. Donna's Medical Spa, $420 listed under therapeutic skincare treatments. A weekend at a hotel in New York that I had never been told about. A golf simulator membership, a wine subscription service, and then down near the bottom, the only line item that had anything to do with the reason that card existed in the first place. Similac formula, one purchase, $28.47. That was the full extent of Tyler Harlow's financial investment in his daughter's first 5 months of life. I clicked on Tyler's card first and selected permanent deactivation. The portal asked me to confirm. I confirmed, then Donna's card. Same process, same confirmation. Done, I said. David was already navigating to the joint household account, the one I had set up 3 years ago, specifically to cover utilities, groceries, and home maintenance at Fox Chapel. I transferred $2,500 into it every first of the month. Tyler withdrew it in cash within 48 hours every single time, and the account sat at near zero for the rest of the month. The current balance was $3. $200. Tyler hadn't made his usual withdrawal because the month had just turned. I initiated a wire transfer full balance every cent back to the Sutton Mechanical operating account. The confirmation screen showed a new balance of $0. That's the last cent he'll ever spend of mine, I said. And I meant it the way I meant very few things in my life. David closed the laptop and poured us both a second cup of coffee from his thermos. And then he made the call to the locksmith service, Sutton Mechanical, kept on contract, the one we used for commercial properties when we needed rekeying done fast and clean. He arranged for the locksmith to meet us at Fox Chapel at 7 immediately following the crew. At 5:15, I called Mike Kowalski. Mike had been with Sutton Mechanical for 15 years. He was 53 years old, built like a man who had spent 3 decades carrying heavy equipment upstairs. And he had a voice like gravel shifting in a metal drum. He answered on the first ring because Mike Kowalski always answered on the first ring, even at 5 in the morning, even on a Saturday, because that was simply the kind of man he was. Boss, no confusion, no grogginess, just readiness. Mike, I need 8 men at the Fox Chapel property at 7 sharp, 3 trucks, the big ones, full inventory removal, everything on the company's asset list for that address. I need it done fast, and I need it done clean. A beat. This the house you put your daughter in? It is. Another beat, shorter. We'll be there at 6:50. There are 2 sets of personal belongings in the house that do not belong to the company, I said. Men's clothing, shoes, a few bags of women's items. Those go into black trash bags and get placed on the front lawn. Do not mix them with company assets and do not damage them. Understood. Mike's voice was completely steady. In 15 years, I had never once heard that man ask a question he didn't need the answer to. Anything else? The HVAC system comes out too, I said. Full removal, air handler, compressor unit, all of it. There was a pause that lasted exactly 2 seconds. Mike doing the math on the labor, the equipment, the time. That's a full morning's work on top of the furniture pull. I know. Double overtime for the whole crew. Done, Mike said. 6:50, 3 trucks. See you there, boss. I hung up and set the phone on the table. David was watching me with the expression he got sometimes, not quite concern, not quite admiration, something that lived in the narrow space between the two. He had seen me make hard decisions before. He had been in the room for most of them, but something about tonight was different, and we both knew it. The HVAC system, David said carefully. You want to pull the entire heating system out of the house. He turned it off, I said. I'm taking it back. David held my gaze for a moment. Then he picked up his coffee cup and took a slow sip and said nothing more about it, because 25 years had taught him when a decision was finished being made. Outside, the first gray light of a Pittsburgh January was beginning to show at the edge of the sky. That particular cold, reluctant dawn that always looked less like sunrise and more like the dark simply giving up. Somewhere across the city, Tyler Harlow and Donna Harlow were asleep and warm and utterly certain that the morning was going to be an ordinary one. They had about 2 hours left of that certainty. I stood up, put on my coat, and picked up the signed eviction order from the table. "Let's go," I said. Mike Kowalski pulled up with 3 trucks at 6:49 in the morning, which was exactly the kind of man he was. I was already parked in the driveway when the convoy turned onto Lakeview Drive. 3 white Sutton mechanical box trucks in a row, tires crunching through the overnight snowfall, exhaust rising in thick white plumes against the gray January sky. 8 men climbed out before the engines had fully stopped. They were dressed for January work, insulated coveralls, steel-toed boots, heavyweight gloves, and they moved with the quiet efficiency of a crew that had been together long enough to not need to talk through every step. Mike walked straight to me, clipboard in hand, breath fogging in the cold air. He looked at the house, looked at me, and said nothing beyond, "Morning, boss. You want to do a walkthrough first?" "I do," I said. I had been standing in that driveway for 11 minutes before the trucks arrived. Just standing looking at the house. The blue spruce trees I had planted along the front were dusted with snow. The branches bent slightly under the weight of it. The front porch light was still on from the night before. Megan must have left it on out of habit. Tyler and Donna had taken a taxi to Pittsburgh International at 5:30 that morning. Their flight to Phoenix boarding at 7:15. They had no idea what was waiting for them when they landed. I unlocked the front door with the LLC master key and pushed it open. The thermostat was back down to 45 degrees. Tyler had reset it after I left the previous evening, exactly as I had known he would. The cold air inside hit me like a confession. Mike stepped in behind me and pulled a sharp breath through his nose. "He reset it," he said. "He did." I took out my phone and photographed the thermostat screen a second time. Timestamp, temperature, the padlock icon back in place. Second piece of documentation for David's file. I walked through the house slowly, Mike beside me, the 2 of us moving from room to room with the measured pace of men doing an inventory rather than a raid. I wanted to see it clearly before his crew stripped it down. The kitchen first. I opened the refrigerator. The top shelf was loaded with Donna's food. Prosciutto, imported cheese, sparkling water in glass bottles, a container of pre-made pasta salad from the gourmet market on Forbes Avenue. The bottom shelf held 3 cans of Similac formula, half a bag of baby carrots, and a single container of plain yogurt. That was it. That was the full extent of what Megan and Lily had been eating out of a refrigerator stocked on a credit card I paid for. On the counter beside the sink, a baby bottle sat in the drying rack. Megan had washed it before the ambulance came. Her hands had been going numb, and she had still washed the bottle. I picked it up carefully and set it on the counter to the side. "This goes with Megan's things," I told Mike, "not in a bag, wrapped." Mike wrote it on his clipboard without a word. We moved to Donna's room. I pushed the door open and stood in the doorway. The Vornado space heater was still running, coils still glowing red, warming a room that had been empty since 5 in the morning. The cashmere throw on the armchair, the sparkling water on the nightstand, a half-used jar of face cream that had cost more than what I paid my entry-level techs for a day's work. In the closet on the shelf above Donna's hanging clothes, I found the receipt. I almost missed it. It was tucked between 2 shoeboxes like she had forgotten it was there. Vornado space heater, 1 unit, $89.99. Purchased on the Sutton Mechanical corporate card 11 weeks ago. She had used my credit line to buy herself the heater she used to stay warm while my granddaughter froze 2 rooms away. I folded the receipt and put it in my coat pocket. Evidence. Mike's crew went to work at 7 sharp. The sound of it filled the neighborhood. The controlled percussion of professional movers doing their job. Fast furniture scraping, dollies rolling, the low thud of appliances being wheeled across hardwood floors and down the front steps into the trucks. Neighbors on Lakeview Drive were awake by then, the early Saturday morning quiet broken by the noise of 3 trucks and 8 working men. I stood in the front doorway and watched. I watched them carry out the leather sofa, where Megan had spent the night trying to keep Lily warm with her own body heat. I watched them roll out the 75-inch television Tyler had picked out himself, the one he watched football on, while Megan gave Lily her midnight feedings alone. I watched them load the refrigerator, the dining table, the bed frames. When they got to Lily's nursery, I went in with them. The crib was still assembled in the corner, the mobile above it still turning slowly in the draft from the open door. Little wooden stars on thin wire catching the weak winter light. I put my hand on the rail and stopped the mobile. "Take this one apart carefully," I told the two men assigned to the room. "The pieces go in a labeled box, not a truck. This goes to the hospital for my daughter." Both men nodded. They worked with their hands, gentle and deliberate, the way men do when they understand, without being told, why something matters. The HVAC crew started on the system at 7:40. The sound changed, then drills and pipe cutters, the groan of the air handler coming loose from its mounts in the utility room. Mike supervised personally, making sure every component was removed clean. The air handler, the compressor unit from the side yard, the ductwork terminations at every register. By 10:15, the house on Lakeview Drive was 4 walls and a floor and nothing else. The locksmith finished at 10:30, smart lock off, industrial deadbolt on, one key in my hand. David taped the corporate recovery notice to the front door himself. Red lettering on white paper sealed with industrial tape at all 4 corners. Property recovered by Sutton Mechanical LLC. Authorized access only. I stood on the front porch and looked at the lawn. 20 black trash bags in 2 rows on the snow-covered grass, already starting to frost over at the edges. 2 rolling suitcases beside them. The good ones Donna had bought at Nordstrom, also on my card. Carol's from 2 houses down was standing at the end of her driveway in a heavy coat watching. She had seen Megan standing alone at the window enough times over the past year that when she caught my eye, she simply nodded once and went back inside. That nod told me everything I needed to know about what the neighbors had seen and said nothing about for too long. My phone buzzed, a text from David. Their flight landed in Phoenix 14 minutes ago. I looked at the 20 bags of frozen garbage on the lawn. Then I got in my truck and drove toward the airport side of the city, because I wanted to be in position when they landed. David's contacts filled in the details later, piece by piece, the way those things always come together when enough people are watching and talking. What I know is this. Tyler Harlow and Donna Harlow landed at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport at 12:41 in the afternoon Arizona time. They took a rideshare to the Phoenician in Scottsdale, 40 minutes straight up Camelback Road to one of the most expensive resort addresses in the American Southwest. Donna had been talking about this trip for 4 months. She had researched the spa menu, selected her treatments in advance, and sent Tyler a typed list of her preferred room temperature settings to relay to the front desk upon arrival. Tyler had been looking forward to a weekend without Megan, without the baby, without having to pretend to care about either one. They walked through the front entrance at 1:57 in the afternoon. I know what the Phoenician looks like in January because I had looked it up that morning while Mike's crew was loading the 3rd truck. Travertine floors, vaulted ceilings, flower arrangements that cost more than a set of residential ductwork. The kind of lobby that makes people feel important before anyone has said a word to them. Donna would have loved every square foot of it. Tyler walked up to the front desk with his shoulders back and the particular expression of a man who believes he belongs in expensive rooms. He set the Sutton Mechanical corporate card on the marble counter the way some men set down a badge. "Harlow," he said, "Presidential Suite. We have a reservation. Go ahead and charge the full weekend package to this card spa dining the works." The front desk associate smiled, the way people in that industry are trained to smile regardless of what the situation actually is. She ran the card through the terminal. The machine beeped once, short and sharp. The screen turned red. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harlow," she said. "Your card has been declined. Would you like to try another form of payment?" Tyler's jaw tightened. "Run it again. That card has no limit." She ran it again. Same beep, same red screen. "Sir, I've tried it 3 times now. The transaction is being rejected each time. Your issuing bank is declining the charge." Donna stepped up beside Tyler and set her hand on the counter. This is completely unacceptable. Do you have any idea how long ago this reservation was made? I specifically requested a room on the upper floor facing Camelback Mountain. Run the card again. Ma'am, I've run it 4 times total. Then your machine is broken, Donna said, her voice going up a half step with each word. This is a 5-star resort. Your equipment should function at a 5-star level. Tyler had already moved on. He pulled his personal debit card, the one linked to the joint household account, where I had deposited $2,500 every first of the month for 3 years, and handed it across the counter. The associate ran it. The screen showed the balance before declining. Tyler grabbed the card back and opened his banking app with shaking hands. He refreshed the screen. 0. He refreshed it again. 0. He called the bank's customer service line and walked 3 steps away from the counter, lowering his voice so Donna couldn't hear. I know what the customer service representative told him because David's contact at the bank confirmed it afterward. The representative informed Tyler that both corporate credit cards had been permanently deactivated by the primary account holder earlier that morning. The joint household account had been cleared by an authorized wire transfer initiated at 4:22 in the morning. He had no active access to any funds associated with either account. Tyler came back to the counter, looking like a man who had just been told the building was on fire but couldn't find the exits. He tried to explain. He said there had been a banking error. He said he would call his financial advisor. He asked if they could hold the room while he sorted things out. Just for an hour, he would have it resolved within the hour. The front desk associate had heard some version of this before. She excused herself and returned 2 minutes later with the duty manager, a man in his 50s, in a dark suit, who had the practiced patience of someone who dealt with difficult situations every day and had long since stopped being surprised by any of them. He was accompanied by 2 members of hotel security. "Mr. Harlow, Miss Harlow," the manager said pleasantly, "I apologize for the difficulty. Unfortunately, we've been unable to process payment for your reservation, and our system has flagged one of the presented cards as deactivated by its issuing company. Without a valid form of payment, I'm not able to allow you to check in." He paused for exactly 1 beat. "I'm going to need to ask you to gather your luggage and step outside. If you're able to provide alternate payment by phone, our reservations team can assist you from there." Donna's face went a deep, dangerous shade of red. "I beg your pardon? Do you know how far we traveled to, ma'am?" One of the security officers stepped forward half a step, not threatening, just present, the international language of the conversation being finished. What David's contact described to me later was not graceful. Donna did not go quietly. She said things in that lobby that I suspect the staff would remember for a long time, and she said them at a volume that carried across the travertine floors to every other guest within 40 feet. Tyler stopped arguing much sooner than she did, which told me that some part of him already understood what had happened, even if he didn't yet know the full shape of it. The security officers walked them to the exit. Not roughly, professionally, the kind of escort that is somehow more humiliating for its courtesy. They came out through the revolving door into the Arizona afternoon, 72 degrees, clear sky, bougainvillea in full color along the resort's exterior wall. Their luggage was brought out behind them on a cart by a bellman who set it on the sidewalk and wished them a pleasant afternoon with complete sincerity. Donna sat down on her suitcase right there on the sidewalk and pressed both hands to her face. Tyler stood next to her with his phone in his hand, staring at a screen that had nothing useful to show him. He called my number. I watched my phone light up on the seat beside me. I was parked in my own driveway in Pittsburgh, 72 degrees inside the truck, and I let it ring through to voicemail. He called twice more. Voicemail both times. Then he opened Google Maps and searched for the nearest Greyhound bus station. It was 2.3 miles away. He looked at their luggage. He looked at Donna. He looked at the sidewalk stretching away from the resort in both directions under a sun that had no interest in their problems. Then he picked up the heavier of the 2 suitcases and started walking. They lost the house, the cards, the accounts, everything in a single night. But they don't know the worst part yet. Comment, keep going if you're still here. Because what happens when they finally come back to Pittsburgh is something I personally waited 40 hours to see. Note, this story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. If you'd prefer not to continue, this is a good moment to step away. David's people tracked them from the moment Tyler's Rolex showed up in the system. There is a pawn shop on McDowell Road in Phoenix, the kind of place with iron bars on the windows and a hand-painted sign, and a man behind a scratched plexiglass partition who has seen every flavor of desperation walk through his door and stopped feeling surprised by any of it. Tyler walked in there at 4:15 that Saturday afternoon with a stainless steel Rolex Submariner on his wrist that he had bought with my money 18 months ago for $4,200. He walked out 40 minutes later with $340 in cash and a receipt that required his name, his phone number, and a current address. He gave the address of the cheapest motel he had found on his phone during the walk from the Phoenician, a place called the Desert Rest Inn that charged $39 a night and did not ask questions. Marcus Cole had a contact at that pawn shop. By the time Tyler checked into his $39 room that evening, Marcus Cole knew exactly where he was sleeping. Tyler didn't know that yet. What he knew was that $340 was enough for 2 Greyhound tickets to Pittsburgh, 1 night at the Desert Rest Inn, and 2 value meals from the McDonald's 2 blocks away, which Donna ate in complete silence, holding the paper bag with 2 fingers like it might contaminate her. They boarded the bus at 8:40 Sunday morning. I am going to tell you what 38 hours on a Greyhound bus looks like, because I think it matters. The seats are narrow, and the upholstery is cracked along the seams, and the overhead air vents blow at one temperature, regardless of what the outside weather is doing. There are no assigned seats. There are no charging ports on the older coaches. The bathroom at the back of the bus is the size of a broom closet and smells accordingly. And the lighting throughout the cabin is the particular shade of fluorescent white that makes everyone look slightly unwell. Tyler Harlow had never been on a Greyhound bus in his life. They transferred in Albuquerque after 9 hours, waited 2 hours in a station that had plastic chairs bolted to the floor and a vending machine with 3 items sold out. Then boarded again for Kansas City. Another transfer, another wait. By the time they rolled into Pittsburgh, they had been on buses or in stations for 38 hours straight, and Tyler had received 11 more text messages from Marcus Cole, each one shorter and less patient than the last. The final one sent, as the bus crossed the Ohio border, read simply, "Clock's at 8 days. Don't make me come find you." Tyler had been staring at that message for 6 hours when the bus pulled into the Pittsburgh Greyhound terminal at 10:40 Tuesday night. The temperature on the platform was 14 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind off the river cut straight through his wool overcoat, the same overcoat he had worn into my daughter's house 3 days ago. Like a man who had never once considered that warmth was something you could lose. Donna came down the bus steps behind him and made a sound when the cold hit her that I won't describe, except to say it carried across the empty platform and bounced off the terminal walls. "We are taking a cab," she announced, pulling her coat tighter and dragging her suitcase toward the terminal doors. "I don't care what it costs." "We have $47 left," Tyler said. Donna stopped walking. She turned around slowly and looked at him, the way a person looks at something they cannot quite believe is real. $47. $47. She pressed her lips together so hard the color went out of them entirely. Then she turned back toward the terminal and said nothing more, which was its own kind of answer. They took the Port Authority bus to the Fox Chapel area, $7 each, 14 total, and walked the last 6 blocks to Lakeview Drive in the dark, dragging their luggage through snow that had been compressed into gray ice by 2 days of foot traffic and freeze-thaw cycles. Donna's rolling suitcase lost a wheel on the 3rd block. She carried it by the handle after that, the broken corner scraping along the sidewalk with every step. Tyler had been trying to call me since Sunday morning. 12 calls total by the time they turned onto Lakeview Drive. Every one went to voicemail. He had called David Keller's office line, closed. It was Monday morning at 4 light a.m. He had called the main Sutton Mechanical number. Same result. He had even at some point during the Kansas City transfer called Megan's cell phone. I know this because the nurse at Allegheny General told me Megan's phone was in the drawer of her bedside table, powered off on Megan's own request, and it stayed that way. What I remember most clearly about that Tuesday night sitting in my truck 2 blocks from Lakeview Drive, with the heat running and a cup of gas station coffee going cold in the cup holder, was how quiet the neighborhood was. Nearly midnight in Fox Chapel in January, every house dark, every car and every driveway frosted over, the whole street wrapped in the specific silence of people who were warm and asleep, and entirely unaware of the 2 figures pulling broken luggage through the snow toward a house that no longer belonged to them. I watched them in my rearview mirror as they turned onto Lakeview Drive. I watched them slow down. I watched Tyler stop completely 40 yards from the house and just stand there in the middle of the street. Even from 2 blocks away, even in the dark, I could see the red of the notice on the front door. I put the truck in drive. I pulled the truck up slowly. No headlights rolling the last half block on the packed non-snow until I was sitting directly behind them. They hadn't heard me coming. Tyler was at the front door, both fists hammering the wood, punching the keypad where the smart lock used to be, and finding nothing but cold steel plate. Donna was on her knees in the snow beside one of the trash bags she had torn open, pulling things out with both hands, shoes, blouses, a silk scarf tangled up with a kitchen spatula, her voice climbing into something between rage and hysteria that carried clean and sharp through the frozen air. I sat in the truck with the engine idling and watched them for 30 seconds. Then I turned my headlights on. The beam hit Tyler square in the back, and he spun around, one hand raised against the light, his face raw from the cold and his eyes so bloodshot they looked like road maps. When he recognized the truck, something happened in his expression that I had never seen on him before. Every layer of him, the confidence, the entitlement, the practiced ease of a man who had always had someone else to absorb his consequences, came off all at once like a coat he had dropped. What was underneath it was just fear. Plain and unadorned, he ran at the truck. He came around to the passenger side and grabbed the door handle first, found it locked, then started hammering on the window with the flat of his hand, so hard the glass shuddered in its frame. His voice was ragged and breathless, cracking at the edges. Gerald, open the door. What did you do? This is my house. You can't do this. I'm calling the police right now. I swear to God, I will have you arrested for breaking and entering. I lowered the passenger window exactly 3 inches. The air inside my truck was 72 degrees. I watched the heat roll out through that 3-inch gap and hit Tyler's face, and I watched his eyes close for exactly 1 second. Involuntary, helpless, his body betraying him the same way Lily's body had betrayed her when the cold got deep enough. He hated himself for it. I could see that too. I spoke quietly enough that he had to stop yelling to hear me. Call them, Tyler. I kept my eyes level with his. Call the police right now. I will show them the conditional use agreement you signed 3 years ago. The one where you acknowledged in writing that this property is owned by Sutton Mechanical LLC and that your occupancy is conditional and revocable upon documented safety violations. I have a photograph of the thermostat locked at 45 degrees time-stamped Friday evening. I have a second photograph of it reset to 45 degrees after I left time-stamped Saturday morning at 7:04 a.m. I have Allegheny General Hospital's documentation of my granddaughter's hypothermia admission, and I have the social work report they filed on Saturday afternoon. I paused. Call them. I'll be delighted to show them everything. Tyler's hands had come off the window. He was gripping the door frame now, the knuckles white, breathing hard through his mouth. You froze our accounts, he said, his voice dropping to something low and unsteady. You took everything. Megan is going to... I have something for you. I reached across to the passenger seat and picked up the brown envelope I had prepared with David the previous morning. I pushed it through the 3-inch gap. It fell against Tyler's chest, and he grabbed it before it dropped, tearing it open with shaking fingers. He pulled out the pages and held them up in the beam of my headlights. The first page was a screenshot of his conversation with Marcus Cole, the full thread printed in color, the message about selling the house and sending Megan to stay with her mother highlighted in yellow. The second page was the booking confirmation for the Phoenician presidential suite, charged to the Sutton mechanical corporate card while Lily was being loaded into an ambulance. The third page was Donna's text message. "Is the baby okay?" Confirmed Scottsdale printed, alongside the timestamp showing it was sent at 11:30 the previous Friday night. Tyler's hands started shaking so badly the pages made a sound. He looked up at me. His face had gone the color of the snow around his feet. "You were going to put my daughter and my granddaughter out of that house," I said. "You were going to hand a $1.2 million property to a loan shark and leave Megan with a 5-month-old baby and nowhere to go in January. Tyler, in January, and you were going to do it while sitting at a resort spa and charging the room to my card." I let that settle for exactly 2 seconds. "You told me on Friday that cold never hurt anyone. I hope these past 2 days have given you a chance to reconsider that position." From behind me, Donna's voice cut across the yard. She had gotten to her feet and was limping toward the truck, one hand pressed to her lower back, her coat soaked through at the knees from the snow. "Gerald, please, I am a 63-year-old woman. You cannot leave us like this. It is nearly midnight and it is 14 degrees, and I have nowhere to go. Have some decency." I looked at her through the rear passenger window for a long moment, then I looked back at Tyler. "Your mother told Megan that cold builds character. She said women in her generation worked in the fields until the day they delivered." I raised the window 1 slow inch. "I'm sure she'll be fine." Tyler lurched forward. Gerald, wait." The window sealed shut. I put the truck in reverse, backed out slowly, swung around, and drove away down Lakeview Drive. In my mirrors, I could see Tyler standing in the road, the envelope in one hand, the other hand pressed flat to the top of his head. Donna had sat back down on her suitcase in the snow. Neither one of them moved. I turned at the end of the street and they disappeared from the mirror, and I felt nothing that I would call satisfaction and nothing that I would call regret. What I felt was the particular clarity that comes when a system that has been malfunctioning for years finally stops running. I had 3 more things left to do. I drove toward the first one. I drove past the Red Star Inn on my way back to the office. I hadn't planned to. It was out of the way down through the Strip District, where the wholesale warehouses and produce markets sat dark and locked. At this hour, the sidewalks empty, the streetlights throwing orange puddles on the wet asphalt. But David had texted me the name of the motel when his contact confirmed Tyler's check-in. And I suppose some part of me wanted to see it, not out of cruelty, out of something closer to completion. The Red Star Inn was a 3-story concrete building wedged between a tire shop and a vacant lot. Its sign missing 2 letters, its parking lot holding 4 cars, and a pickup truck with a cracked windshield. Room 2111 had its light on, a single lamp visible through curtains that didn't quite meet in the middle. I drove past without slowing down and went back to the office. What happened inside room 2111 that night? David's contact told me the following morning, piece by piece. Tyler and Donna had taken the Port Authority bus from Fox Chapel to the Strip District with $33 left after the fare, the last of the cash from the Rolex. Tyler had chosen the Red Star Inn because it was the cheapest result that came up when he searched on his phone, and because it accepted cash, which, at that particular moment in his life, was the only form of currency he had left. The room was on the 2nd floor, accessible by an outdoor staircase with a metal railing that left rust on your palm when you grabbed it. The carpet was the color of old mustard. The heater on the wall was a baseboard unit from approximately 1987 that clicked and hissed and produced warmth in inconsistent bursts, like a man who could only breathe every 3rd breath. One window looked out onto the alley behind the tire shop. The lock on the door required you to lift the handle and push simultaneously, and even then it only caught about 2/3 of the time. Donna stood in the middle of the room and looked at it the way a person looks at something they have been told exists but have never actually believed in. "I am not sleeping here," she said. "You don't have a choice, Mom." Tyler dropped both bags on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress sank 4 inches under him. "We have $33. We're not exactly in a position to be selective. Donna turned to face him slowly, and when she did the last of whatever performance she had been maintaining. For the past 2 days came down all at once. Tyler told David's contact later that he had never seen his mother's face look like that, like something behind it had just stopped running. "I told you," she said. Her voice was quiet in a way that was somehow worse than yelling. "I told you to get that house secured. I told you 3 years ago to find out exactly what Gerald owned and what you owned, and to make sure your name was on everything that mattered. I told you, Tyler. Mom, I didn't know he'd structured it through the company. You didn't know, because you never read anything." She pulled off her wet coat and dropped it on the chair by the window. "You signed whatever he put in front of you, because it was easier than paying attention, and now we are in a $39 motel room in the Strip District with $33 to our name." She pressed her fingers to her temples. "How long have you owed money to these people?" Tyler was quiet for a moment too long. 6 months. Donna closed her eyes. When she opened them, she had made some kind of decision. "Call your sister. Sandra's in Mount Lebanon. It's past midnight. Call her." Donna was already opening her bag, already pulling out items and setting them on the dresser with the focused efficiency of a woman reorganizing her priorities in real time. "Tell her I need somewhere to stay. Tell her I had a fall or something. Tell her whatever you need to tell her to get me out of this room by morning." Tyler looked up from the bed. "What about me?" Donna set down the item in her hand, a toiletry bag monogrammed "bought on my card at Nordstrom," and looked at her son with an expression I am told was completely without warmth. "What about you, Tyler? You had a house. You had a wife. You had a father-in-law who paid for everything you had and asked nothing in return except that you not be an idiot with it, and you lost all of it." She picked the toiletry bag back up. "I cannot fix that for you. I could not fix that for you, even if I wanted to. You're going to leave." Tyler's voice cracked straight down the middle. "I did all of this, the trips, everything. Every single thing I did was for you, Mom, the spa, the heater in your room, the Scottsdale reservation. All of it was for you, and you're going to walk out of this room and leave me here." Donna dialed Sandra's number. She held Tyler's gaze while it rang. Sandra answered on the 4th ring, groggy and alarmed, and Donna told her there had been a terrible situation with Gerald, and that she needed somewhere safe and warm, and that she would explain in the morning. Sandra said, "Of course, come right now." She would put the kettle on. Donna ended the call and tucked the phone into her coat pocket. "I love you," she told Tyler, and I believe she meant it in whatever way she was capable of meaning it. "But I am 63 years old, and I am not going to sit in this room and wait for the men you borrowed money from to knock on that door." She picked up the toiletry bag and her carry-on and walked to the door. She lifted the handle and pushed simultaneously, and the lock caught on the second try. "Mom." Tyler stood up. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Mom, please don't go." She was already in the doorway. "Fix it, Tyler," she said. "Whatever fixing it looks like for you now, do that." She stepped out onto the landing. The cold air rushed into the room around her. "And don't call Sandra. I need this." The door swung shut behind her. Tyler stood in the middle of a $39 motel room in Pittsburgh at 12:45 in the morning, with $33 in his pocket and 11 unanswered texts from Marcus Cole on his phone, and a door lock that only caught 2/3 of the time. He sat back down on the bed. The baseboard heater clicked and hissed. Outside in the alley, a cat knocked something off a ledge, and the sound echoed up through the thin walls like a starting pistol. Tyler looked at the door. David's contact at the Pittsburgh PD told me later that Marcus Cole had been running debt collection operations in the city for 11 years and had never once been successfully prosecuted. Not because he was invisible. Everyone in certain circles knew who Marcus Cole was, knew what he did, and roughly how he did it. The reason he stayed out of courtrooms was simpler than that. The people who owed him money were by definition people who had already demonstrated poor judgment. And poor judgment tends to compound. By the time Marcus Cole came to collect, his debtors were so buried under their own decisions that adding a criminal complaint to the pile was the last thing they were capable of organizing. Tyler Harlow was a perfect example of the type. Marcus Cole found him at the Red Star Inn at 6:22 Wednesday morning, which meant he had been up and moving before dawn, which meant this was not a reactive visit. This was scheduled. This was the first item on Marcus Cole's Monday calendar. I know the broad shape of what happened because David's contact gave me the summary 3 days later, and because Tyler himself, in a moment of desperation I will get to shortly, told Megan most of the rest of it. I'm going to tell you what I know, and I am going to tell you that I did not call the police that morning, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. The door to room 211 did not hold. It had never been a particularly secure door. The lock caught 2/3 of the time on a good day, and the frame itself was hollow core, the kind installed in budget construction, because it is cheap and light, and nobody building a $39 motel has quality control at the top of their priority list. One firm impact from a man who knew what he was doing, and it swung open without ceremony. Marcus Cole walked in with 2 men behind him. He was not what people imagine when they think of that particular profession. He was 47 years old, medium height, the kind of build that comes from years of physical labor rather than a gym, wearing a clean flannel shirt under a Carhartt jacket and work boots with actual mud on them. He had a scar through his left eyebrow and eyes that had the particular quality of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by anything a person could do or say. He looked, in short, like half the men I had employed over 30 years of running a trades company, and that I think was part of what made him effective. He did not look like trouble until trouble was already in the room with you. He looked around room 211 without any particular expression. The unmade bed, the bags on the floor, the baseboard heater clicking in the corner. Tyler. He said the same way you say good morning to someone you see every day. Tyler had been sitting on the bed, still in his clothes from the night before, and he came off it fast, too fast, stumbling sideways into the nightstand and sending the lamp rocking. One of Cole's men stepped to the left, and the other stepped to the right without being told, covering the room in 2 movements, blocking the bathroom door and the exit simultaneously. It was practiced. It was the kind of thing you get smooth at over 11 years. Marcus. Tyler held both hands up in front of him, palms out, fingers spread. His voice was doing something he couldn't control, running slightly faster than his thoughts, words bumping into each other at the edges. I know what you're going to say. I know what it looks like, but I have a plan. I just need you to hear me out. The house situation is temporary. Gerald pulled a legal move that I didn't see coming, but I have an attorney and we can contest. Tyler. Marcus Cole's voice did not go up. It did not go down. It simply stopped Tyler the way a wall stops a car. The house is gone. Your father-in-law owns it through his LLC and has the paperwork to prove it. My attorney confirmed this Friday night, which is why I'm not angry about the house. He pulled the single chair in the room away from the wall and sat down in it backwards, forearms on the top rail. I'm here because you owe me $60,000 and you have nothing. That is a different kind of problem. Tyler's hands were still up. He lowered them slowly. If you give me time, I've given you time. Marcus Cole's voice was almost conversational. I gave you 4 months before I started sending messages. I gave you extensions twice. What I got in return was a promise about a house you didn't own. He tilted his head slightly. Here's what I want to know. What do you actually have right now that is worth anything to me? The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds and contained the entire sum of Tyler Harlow's options, which was not a large number. Nothing, Tyler said. The word came out like he had swallowed it first and was surprised to find it coming back up. Marcus Cole nodded slowly like this confirmed something he had already suspected. That's what I thought. He stood up from the chair. So, here's what's going to happen. I have a contract relationship with a warehouse operation out in the Allegheny Industrial Park. They do commercial HVAC installation, big units, rooftop work, the kind of job where you need bodies more than you need brains. He looked at Tyler directly. You're going to be one of those bodies. Every dollar you earn goes into an account I control until the $60,000 is covered. You work every day they'll take you, including weekends. You don't call in sick. You don't miss a shift. You don't leave Pittsburgh. Tyler stared at him. I've never done physical labor in my life. Me? I know. Marcus Cole said. That's obvious. You'll learn. He moved toward the door and both of his men repositioned in the same practiced way they had entered. Van picks you up at the curb at 5:30 tomorrow morning. Steel-toed boots, long sleeves. They'll have a hard hat for you. He paused in the doorway. And Tyler, don't make me come back here. I know where your mother is staying. I know it's your sister's house in Mount Lebanon. I'd rather not involve her. Tyler's chest caved in on itself like a building coming down slow. I'll be at the curb, he said. Marcus Cole left. His men left. The door swung partway closed behind them and stopped, the broken latch catching on nothing. Tyler sat back down on the bed and pressed both palms to his face and made a sound I have no desire to describe in detail. What I will say is that it was the sound of a man arriving finally and completely at the bottom of everything he had built. Outside in the Strip District, Pittsburgh was waking up. Produce trucks were pulling into the wholesale markets 2 blocks over. A garbage truck was working its way down the alley. The sky above the river was going from black to the particular bruised gray of a Pittsburgh January morning. I was already at the hospital by then. Megan was asking for me. She was sitting up when I walked in, not lying flat the way she had been when the nurses first moved her out of the ER bay into a proper room. She was sitting up against the pillows with a breakfast tray on the table beside her. Half of a piece of toast eaten, a cup of orange juice with a straw in it. The IV line was still in her left arm, but the second bag of fluids had been removed, and her right hand was wrapped in fresh gauze, clean and white against the blanket. She looked like my daughter again. That was the first thing I thought. Not the gray, barely conscious woman I had seen on the ER gurney. Not the hollow-eyed girl who had spent God knows how many nights sitting in a freezing house telling herself she was fine. She looked like Megan. She looked up when I came through the door, and the first word out of her mouth was not hello, and it was not how are you, and it was not any of the things people say when they have been through something terrible and are trying to act like they haven't been. Dad, where's Lily? Her voice cracked on the last word, and her eyes filled up fast, not spilling over yet, just filling the way a glass fills when you pour too much in, and you have to hold very still. I crossed the room and pulled the chair up close to the bed and sat down, and I took her unbandaged hand in both of mine before I said anything at all. She's on the 3rd floor, I told her. NICU. Her temperature has been normal for over 30 hours. Dr. Reeves thinks she'll be out of the incubator today. I squeezed her hand once, firm and deliberate. She's strong, Megan. She's got your stubborn in her. She is going to be absolutely fine. Megan pressed her lips together hard and looked up at the ceiling for a moment, the way people do when they are trying to keep something from coming out all at once. When she looked back down, 2 tears had made it out anyway, tracking straight down the sides of her face and dropping onto the pillow. I kept thinking, she started and then stopped. Started again. I kept thinking that if I just held her close enough, if I just stayed awake and kept her against me, she'd be warm enough. I told myself it wasn't that bad. I told myself I was overreacting. Her voice broke open on that last word. I almost let my baby die because I was afraid of overreacting. Megan, I held her hand tighter. Look at me. She did. He taught you that, I said. That is not something you arrived at on your own. That was put into you carefully over a long time by someone who needed you to doubt yourself so that he could keep doing what he was doing. You are not going to carry that as your fault. Do you hear me? She was crying properly now, not trying to stop it. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep down where things have been compressed for too long. I did not try to stop it either. I sat there and held her hand and let her cry because some things need to come out before anything else can go in. After a while, it slowed. She reached for a tissue from the box on the nightstand, pressed it to her face, exhaled a long, shuddering breath. Tyler hasn't come, she said. It wasn't a question, so no. She nodded slowly. Then she looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face in years. Not since she was a teenager. Not since before Tyler. Clear and direct and completely without apology. Show me, she said. Whatever you found on his phone. Show me all of it. I took the brown envelope out of my coat pocket and set it on the blanket in front of her. She opened it herself. She read the Marcus Cole thread first. I watched her eyes moving line by line, going back twice on the message about sending her to stay with her mother. Reading it a third time, her jaw tightened. She moved to the next page, the Phoenician booking confirmation. She looked at the date, looked at the timestamp, understood immediately what it meant in relation to what had been happening to her and Lily at that same hour. A sound came out of her that was not quite a word, something between a breath and a flinch. Then Donna's message. "Is the baby okay?" confirmed Scottsdale. She stared at that one for a long time without moving. "How long?" she finally asked, setting the pages down on the blanket. "How long do you think it's been like this?" "I don't know exactly how long," I said. "Long enough that you stopped trusting what your own body was telling you. Long enough that you were holding a 5-month-old baby in a 45-degree house and telling yourself you were overreacting by considering calling for help." Megan looked down at the bandage on her right hand. She turned it over slowly, examining the gauze. The way you examine something you know is covering damage you haven't fully seen yet. "He told me I was too sensitive," she said quietly. "About the cold, about money, about all of it. Every time I said something was wrong, he had an explanation for why I was misreading the situation. Every single time." She looked up, and I believed him. For 3 years, I believed him over my own eyes. "You're not believing him anymore," I said. She shook her head. "Once, definitive, the way you close a door you don't plan to open again." "I want to file for divorce," she said. Her voice was completely steady. "Full custody of Lily. I don't want him anywhere near her. Not at school pickups, not at holidays, not anywhere." She held my gaze. "Can David do that?" "David already has the paperwork started," I said. "He's been working on it since Saturday morning." Something moved across her face, relief, and underneath it, something fiercer. "I want Lily to have your last name, Dad. I'm taking mine back, and I want her to have it too. Lily Sutton." She said it the way you say something you've been thinking for longer than you realized. "I want that to be the first thing that's hers, that has nothing to do with him." My throat tightened in a way I hadn't expected, and I had to take a breath before I answered. "I'll tell David today," I said. Megan looked at me for a long moment. Really looked, the way she used to when she was small and trying to figure out if I was telling her the full truth or the comfortable version of it. "Did you take the house?" she asked. "I did." "Good." She reached over and picked up the orange juice and took a long sip through the straw and the normalcy of it. My daughter drinking orange juice on a Wednesday morning, color back in her face. "There's one more thing," I said before I go. "I want you to sign something for the nurse's station." I handed her the patient visitor restriction form Dr. Reeves had left with me that morning. She read it, picked up the pen from the tray table, and signed her name at the bottom without asking a single clarifying question. Tyler Harlow was no longer permitted within this wing of Allegheny General Hospital. Megan handed the form back to me and picked up her toast. "Now go check on Lily," she said, "and then come back and tell me everything." The NICU on the 3rd floor was quieter in the morning than it had been at night. At 2 in the morning, the machines had seemed louder somehow, every beep and hiss amplified by the silence around it. The whole room holding its breath in the morning light coming through the high windows, with the day shift nurses moving between stations and the soft voices of other parents audible through the glass. It felt less like a place where things hung in the balance and more like a place where things were slowly, steadily getting better. I pushed through the door after the hand washing and the gown and the badge escort and Patricia, the same nurse who had walked me through the protocol on Saturday night. A woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the unhurried competence of someone who had been doing this job for a long time and had chosen it every single morning since, looked up from the station and smiled before I even asked. "She's been waiting for you," Patricia said. "Come see." Lily's incubator was in the same spot in the 2nd row, but the difference from Saturday night was immediate and physical. You felt it before you fully processed it. Half the electrode leads were gone. The warming blanket had been replaced with a regular flannel one, pale yellow with small ducks on it, which I recognized as the one I had sent up from the bag of Megan's things on Sunday. The The pulse oximeter was still on her foot, but the monitor screen above showed numbers that were steady and green and going nowhere alarming, and Lily was awake. She was lying on her back, looking up at the top of the incubator with the focused, slightly cross-eyed attention that babies give to everything between 0 and 6 months, as if the plain white plastic above her was the most interesting thing she had encountered so far in her brief life. Her hands were free of leads now, and she had one fist loosely closed against her cheek, the other waving with the slow, random purposefulness of someone conducting a symphony they can only hear themselves. Patricia opened the side port of the incubator. "Go ahead," she said. "You can hold her hand." I reached in. Lily's fingers were warm, not hospital warm, not the warmth of a machine keeping something alive against the odds, warm the way a healthy baby is warm. The specific warmth that means everything inside is working the way it is supposed to work. She grabbed my finger the way she always did, the reflex grip that babies have before they know they're doing it, and I stood there with my finger in my granddaughter's fist, and I did not try to be composed about it, and I was not. "Her core temp has been 98.6 for 18 hours straight," Patricia told me, giving me a moment before she continued. "Doctor, Reeves is going to discharge her from the NICU this afternoon, assuming she takes her 11 feeding well. She'll need a follow-up with her pediatrician in 48 hours, and you'll want to keep her environment between 70 and 74 degrees for the next 2 weeks while she finishes regulating." "But Mr. Sutton," Patricia paused and looked at me directly over her reading glasses. "She is going to be fine. I don't say that to everyone. I'm saying it to you because it's true." I thanked her in a way that probably didn't adequately convey what I meant, because there are not good enough words for what you want to say to the person who kept watch over your granddaughter through the coldest night of her life. I stood at that incubator for 20 minutes. I thought about Megan at 4 years old in the cab of the F-250 wearing my hard hat. I thought about the day Megan called me to say she was pregnant, how her voice had sounded like sunlight. I thought about standing in a freezing house 3 days ago, touching Lily's face and feeling the cold in her skin, and knowing with absolute certainty that someone had made a choice that led directly to that moment, and I thought about what came next. I took out my phone and called David Keller. He answered on the second ring. "I was just about to call you," he said, which with David usually meant he had news that required a conversation. "Lily's being discharged this afternoon," I said. "I need the house ready. I need it warm, and I need it furnished, and I need the nursery done before Megan walks through the door." "Mike's crew has been there since 7 this morning," David said. "New HVAC system is fully installed and running, smart thermostat, no lockout function set at 72. I took the liberty of having the interior designer I use for commercial staging do the living spaces. The nursery is—" He paused in a way that told me he had seen it. "The nursery is good, Gerald. It's really good." "What's the second thing?" I said, because there was always a second thing with David. "Divorce petition is filed as of this morning," he said. "Pennsylvania no fault, Megan as petitioner. I've included a motion for temporary full physical custody of Lily, pending the hearing, which the judge will almost certainly grant given the circumstances. The child endangerment documentation from Allegheny General is attached, the social work report, the hypothermia admission record, both thermostat photographs." A brief pause. "There's also the matter of getting Tyler to sign the voluntary parenting agreement. If he contests custody, we're looking at a hearing in 60 to 90 days. If he signs voluntarily, it's done in a week." "He'll sign," I said. "You sound certain." "I know where he is," I said, "and I know what his life looks like right now. A man who woke up this morning on a cot in a warehouse operation on the Allegheny Industrial Park does not have the resources or the energy to contest a custody hearing." I watched Lily's hand open and close around my finger. "I'll bring the paperwork to him directly." David was quiet for a moment. "I'll have it ready by end of day tomorrow." "Good." I looked at Lily one more time, the yellow blanket, the small fist, the steady green numbers on the screen above her. "One more thing, David. I need you to add a legal name change petition to the filing. Lily's last name. I want it to go through at the same time as the divorce." "Sutton," David said. Sutton, I said. I heard him write it down. The sound of his pen on paper, small and final, like a period at the end of a sentence that had been going on too long. I said goodbye to Patricia and took the elevator back down to the second floor. I stopped at the nurse's station and asked them to let Megan know that Lily was awake and warm and waiting to come home. Then I walked out to the parking garage and sat in my truck and gave myself exactly 3 minutes to feel everything I had been holding at arm's length since Friday afternoon. After 3 minutes, I started the engine. I had paperwork to collect and a trip to make to the Allegheny Industrial Park. The Allegheny Industrial Park in January looks like the end of the world rendered in corrugated aluminum. No trees, no shelter, just loading docks and chain-link fencing and acres of flat metal rooftop absorbing the wind off the river and giving nothing back. I had worked sites like this my entire career. I had climbed rooftops like this in January with frozen hands and a job to finish. I knew exactly what it felt like up there. I wanted Tyler to know too. I parked across the access road and found him before I even got out of the truck. He was 60 feet up on the north slope, dragging a coil of copper refrigerant tubing across the frost-slicked metal surface. His feet went sideways every few steps. His back was bent at the angle of a man who had already pulled something and was working through it because there was no other option. Every time the wind picked up off the river, he stopped moving entirely and just held on. I watched him for 3 minutes. Then I drove to the security booth and asked for the site supervisor. He was a heavy-set man in a reflective vest who looked at the envelope in my hand and made a fast calculation. 2 minutes later, he had his hands cupped around his mouth, shouting Tyler's name up at the roof. Tyler took too long to come down. I watched him navigate the access ladder one rung at a time, both hands white-knuckling the rails, his feet searching for each step, like a man who had discovered that his body had limits he had never previously consulted. When he stepped off the last rung and turned around, I understood why. His face was raw from the cold. The particular burned red of skin that has been against wind and frost reflected metal for hours without adequate protection. His eyes were watering involuntarily. His right cheekbone still carried the shadow of bruising from Marcus Cole's visit 2 nights ago. He was wearing a borrowed work jacket 2 sizes too large. And when he walked toward the chain-link fence and put his hands on it, I could see that his fingers were stiff inside the thin gloves, slow in the way that fingers get when cold has worked its way into the tendons. Gerald. His voice had dried out from hours of cold air. You're not here to help me. I already know that. No, I said. I'm here for Megan. I fed the documents through the gap in the fence where the latch had rusted away. Tyler took them with those slow, stiff fingers and held them up in the flat winter light. He read the divorce petition without reacting, which told me he had been expecting it. The full custody motion made his jaw tighten and then go loose, the specific release of a man making peace with something he cannot change. The voluntary parenting agreement, which said he would not contest custody or visitation rights until Lily turned 18 and chose for herself, he read twice. Then he got to the last page. He read it once, lowered it, read it again. Lily Sutton, he said. Not a question, not an argument. Just the words spoken out loud, like he needed to hear the shape of them to believe they were real. That was Megan's decision, I said, not mine. Tyler looked down at his boots, borrowed steel-toed pair already scuffed through 3 days of work, and then back up at me. The calculation was gone from his face. The performance was gone. He just looked like a man standing in the cold on the wrong side of a fence, staring at everything he had done to get there. I never wanted to hurt her, he said. I know, I said, but you did, and you were planning to do worse. You know what those messages said? You know what you were going to do to her and Lily so you could save yourself. He didn't argue. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a cheap worksite pen, and uncapped it with his teeth, because his fingers couldn't manage the cap. He pressed the papers against the chain link and signed every page David had marked with a red X. His handwriting was unsteady, not from emotion, from the cold living inside his hands, and the fence shifted twice under the pressure of the pen, but he signed every one. He passed them back through the gap. I checked each page, all signed, all dated. I slid them into the envelope. Tyler was still gripping the fence. He looked at me with the eyes of a man who had used up everything he had and knew it. "I haven't had water since this morning," he said. "Gerald, I'm asking you." "You told Megan that cold-built character," I said. "I hope it's building yours." I turned and walked back to the truck. I did not look in the rear-view mirror when I pulled away. Some things you do not need to see twice. The discharge paperwork took 43 minutes. I know the exact number because I stood in the hallway outside Megan's room, holding a brand new infant car seat, still had the tags on it. A Chico key fit that the woman at Bye Bye Baby had recommended when I called from the parking garage after leaving the industrial park. And I watched the minute hand on the hallway clock with the focused attention of a man who has run out of large problems and has temporarily redirected his energy towards small ones. A nurse came out of Megan's room at 2:03 and told me we were all set. Megan came out in a wheelchair, which is hospital policy regardless of how capable the patient is of walking, and she was carrying Lily against her chest, in the way new mothers carry their babies when they have been separated from them. Not loosely, not casually, but with both arms wrapped completely around her, as if the air itself was something to be screened before it got through. Lily was wearing the yellow onesie I had sent up with the bag of Megan's things 2 days ago. And she was awake, looking around the hallway with the serious evaluating expression she had been wearing in the NICU that morning, like she was taking inventory of a world she had decided she was going to engage with on her own terms. Megan looked at the car seat under my arm and then looked at me. "You bought a new one," she said. "The other one was in Tyler's car," I said. I didn't want her first ride home to be in anything that belonged to that chapter. Megan looked at the car seat for another moment, and then looked back at Lily, and then looked back at me, and her eyes went bright and wet in the way that happens when something hits you in a spot you weren't protecting. She pressed her lips together and nodded once firmly the way she does when she has decided not to cry and is going to succeed at it through sheer determination. "Okay," she said, "let's go home." The drive to Fox Chapel took 28 minutes. Megan sat in the back with Lily, one hand resting on the car seat the whole way, not gripping it, just touching it. The contact of a mother who had spent 2 nights wondering if she would get to do exactly this. She did not talk much. I did not push her to. The radio was off. Outside the windows, Pittsburgh in January rolled past, gray sky, salt-whitened roads, the bare trees along Route 28, standing in the cold like they were waiting for something. I turned on to Lakeview Drive at 4:12. The blue spruces along the front had been cleared of the snow that had accumulated over the weekend, and someone, Mike I assumed, because Mike Kowalski had the instincts of a man who understood that the details matter, had strung a simple wreath of pine on the front door. Not decorative, not festive, just green against the white of the door. The kind of thing that says someone thought about your arrival before you got there. Megan saw it and made a small sound that she converted quickly into clearing her throat. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open, and the warmth came out to meet us before we even stepped inside. Not the grudging, uneven warmth of a system working against itself, but the full immediate warmth of a new HVAC installation running at its correct capacity, filling every corner of a house from the foundation up. 72 degrees steady the air moving just enough to be felt on your face without being a draft. Megan walked through the door and stopped. She stood in the entryway with Lily against her chest, and she breathed in slowly through her nose, and I watched her shoulders drop about 1.5 inches. The specific physical release of a person who has been bracing against something for so long that they have forgotten they were bracing. "It's warm," she said. It came out quieter than she intended. "It's going to stay that way," I said. She walked into the living room. The furniture was different. Same bones, different everything else. The interior designer David used had kept the layout, but replaced every piece Tyler had chosen with things that were Megan's in their proportions and their colors. Things that belonged to a woman, rather than to a man's idea of what a showcase home should contain. She moved through the space slowly, touching the back of the sofa, looking at the bookshelves, and I followed at a distance because some things a person needs to do at their own pace. At the end of the hallway, She stopped in front of the door that had been Donna's room. She looked at me over her shoulder. "Go ahead," I said. She pushed it open. The nursery was the color of warm cream lit from two sources. The overhead light on a dimmer set low and a night light on the baseboard, shaped like a small moon that cast a pale gold circle on the floor. The crib was white painted oak assembled in the corner with the mobile of wooden stars above it, the same mobile from before rehung. The rocking chair was new, positioned beside the window that looked out onto the backyard with a small side table next to it that held a baby monitor, a burp cloth, and a glass of water that someone had left there with a paper straw in it, as if anticipating the exact moment Megan would need it. Megan walked in and stood in the center of the room. She turned around once, slowly taking in all of it, and then she looked down at Lily, who was looking back up at her with the same serious, evaluating expression she had been wearing in the hallway. "This is your room," Megan told her. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Nobody's going to touch the thermostat in here. Nobody's going to make decisions about your comfort to benefit themselves." She pressed her lips to the top of Lily's head and held them there for a moment. "This is yours." I stood in the doorway and did not say anything because there was nothing to add. After a while, Megan turned and looked at me, and there were tears on her face that she was not trying to stop or hide or convert into something more composed. "Thank you, Dad," she said. I crossed the room and put my arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into me the way she used to when she was small, the full weight of it, trusting completely, and we stood there in that warm room while Lily looked around at her new world with those serious, curious eyes. Outside, the temperature was dropping towards single digits. Inside, it was 72 degrees. It was going to stay that way. 2 years passed differently when you stopped spending them managing someone else's damage. I understood that fully on a Tuesday morning in January 2026, sitting in the Sutton Mechanical Conference Room, watching Megan present a commercial HVAC proposal to 8 people who were hanging on every word she said. Laser pointer in one, coffee in the other, moving through her slides with the confidence of someone who had built her knowledge from scratch and dared anyone in that room to find a gap in it. She was VP of Operations. She had earned it in 18 months, not because I handed it to her, but because she showed up first, stayed latest, and asked the questions nobody else thought to ask until the title was simply the accurate description of what she already was. I was watching her explain duct sizing ratios when the intercom crackled. "Mr. Sutton Pete, our front desk security officer, retired Pittsburgh PD, 20 years on the job, a man nothing surprised anymore. There is a woman at the main entrance asking for Miss Megan. Says she's the grandmother of a child named Lily. She's been asked twice to step back and hasn't moved." The conference room went quiet. Megan set the laser pointer on the table. She looked at me across the room, and I watched something move through her expression. Not fear, not the flinching uncertainty I had seen on her face 2 years ago in that freezing house on Lakeview Drive, something that had been built since then deliberately one day at a time. "I'll handle it," she told the room. 5 minutes through the lobby glass, we could see Donna Harlow at the entrance. 2 years had redistributed her in ways no spa treatment could fix anymore. Gray hair pinned carelessly, a coat that had seen too many winters, a plastic grocery bag in one hand that appeared to hold most of what she currently owned. She was pressing her palm flat against the glass, calling Megan's name. Megan nodded to Pete. He opened one door 6 inches. Cold air pushed through the gap. Donna's face appeared in the opening, desperate and reaching. "Megan, please." Her voice had gone rough from months of poor shelter and worse circumstances. "I have nowhere to go. Sandra asked me to leave in October. I've been at a shelter since November. I'm not well. I just want to see Lily just once. I am her grandmother." "You're not," Megan said. Not loudly, not with cruelty, just with the clarity of someone stating a fact that required no further debate. "Megan, I made mistakes." "You texted my husband to confirm your spa reservation," Megan said. "While my daughter was in an ambulance with hypothermia, you sat in a heated room paid for with my father's money while Lily's core temperature was dropping toward a number that would have killed her." Her voice didn't waver once. "You didn't have a granddaughter. You had access to one for as long as it was convenient, and you used that access to be cruel to her mother. Those are not the same thing. Donna began to cry. Not the performed distress of someone working an angle, but the raw cornered crying of a woman who had run out of moves. The answer is no, Megan said. And if you come back to this building, Pete calls the police, and I press trespassing charges. That is not a threat. That is the information you need. She looked at Pete. The door closed. Donna's palm left a smear on the glass as she stepped back. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, plastic bag in one hand, the other pressed to her mouth. Then she turned and walked away down the street until the gray January sky swallowed her entirely. Megan picked up her coffee. I need to finish that presentation, she said, and walked back to the conference room. That afternoon, David Keller slid a manila folder across my desk. One page. Tyler Harlow's last known details. Used auto parts operation North Side. Single room above a laundromat on Parisville Avenue. No relationships, no legal matters, no contact with anyone from his former life. Marcus Cole's debt settled 14 months ago. I read it once, fed it into the shredder, listened to the machine run until it stopped. That was the last time Tyler Harlow occupied any space in my life. In June of 2029, I picked Lily up from kindergarten on a Thursday afternoon. She came out of the building at full speed and hit me with the total commitment that 5-year-olds bring to everything they love. She grabbed my neck and squeezed hard. "Grandpa," she said, into my collar. I told my whole class, "You build the things that keep people warm." I held her tighter than I needed to. "That's exactly right," I said. "That's exactly what I do." Megan was by the car, smiling, the unhurried smile of a woman who had earned her peace and knew exactly what it had cost. I buckled Lily in, started the engine, and the heat came on immediately, steady, reliable, the way it always does when the system has been built right and maintained by someone who cares. Some men leave their children money or property, or the kind of name that opens doors. What I wanted to leave Lily was simpler. A house where the heat worked, where the people responsible for her warmth never once made her earn it. She deserved that. Every child does. I have thought a lot, in the 2 years since all of this, about what I would tell a younger version of myself. The man who wrote the checks and signed the papers and told himself that providing everything was the same as protecting everything. It is not the same thing. I learned that the hard way, and my daughter and my granddaughter paid part of the price for my lesson. Do not make my mistake. Do not confuse generosity with protection. The people who love your children will never need you to lower your guard. The ones who need you to lower it are the ones you should be watching most carefully. I also believe, and I say this as a man who has knelt in gratitude more times in the past 2 years than in the 30 before them, that God does not waste suffering. What happened to Megan in that cold house on Lakeview Drive broke something in her that needed to be broken, so that something stronger could grow in its place. I watched that happen. It was not gentle, but it was real. This is what family revenge looks like when it is done right. Not with rage, but with patience and paperwork, and the willingness to let consequences find the people who earned them. These grandpa stories do not always have clean endings, but this one did because Megan decided it would. If this revenge story moved you, if any part of it felt familiar, leave a comment and tell me what you would have done differently. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe. We post every week. Thank you for staying until the end. And a small note before you go. Some of the stories on this channel contain fictional elements constructed for the purpose of sharing a human truth. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, no hard feelings. There is something out there made exactly for you.